will actually make it as a reality, or it will be encouraged?
In a way, we already said, no? So Mr. Weber was very clear about renewables. Probably if we would have been a bit more, determined under this point of view, we probably would have been a bit ahead in this direction. Not only utility scale, I would say, but also prosumers, I was saying before. But, I would say in any crisis there is opportunities, a long saying. Probably now it's clear that we should accelerate a bit. Obviously, there are some other decisions that has been taken in the past, dependency of Russia, that I want to discuss because actually are not relevant now even to Romania, probably to the whole Europe. But actually, yes, in a way, we should accelerate as much as possible in the direction, and probably we should be unite, as also Mr. Wesco was saying, that in that direction. I'd say that, for instance, it's expected, just to make an example about also sometimes regulation could be important. We are waiting at European level the work done by ACER in order to change a bit market design in Europe. This, I would say, has a paramount importance because obviously it's going to accomplish, in a way, the market rules to the increased importance of renewables, as it happens all over the world. This is another point. So United States, South America, even in Asia, the bilateral contract, or better, a market design based on renewables is strongly important. Probably we should leave a bit with two markets, basically, because probably inframarginal and the marginal system is still important. But it's very important at the European level we are doing this step ahead, because in a way we are acknowledging all together as EU that this is the future, also market-wise.
Are there any questions from the room? Now it's time to show up. Corina?
Thank you very much. My name is Corina Morafa. I'm an independent energy and climate expert and an alumna of the leadership programs of both GMF and Aspen. And my question is for Minister Popescu and for Ms. Verschere. It's a relatively similar question. It's about an elephant in this room, which I think we have not named yet, but which we should name, and that is coal. As you know, Romania, according to the Recovery and Resilience Plan, had a very clear calendar for coal phase-out and a very clear deadline. And there have been successive changes to this calendar, revisions in an emergency ordinance in the parliament. There's now this idea of taking a huge chunk of capacity and putting it in a technical reserve, presumably also paying for that reserve and so on and so forth. So I'd like to ask Minister Popescu, how does his vision that he so clearly exposed earlier go hand in hand with this changes to the coal phase-out initial plan? And then to Petrom's CEO, how do you see the maintenance of such a huge coal capacity alive until 2032, conflicting with our decarbonization goals, with freedom of competition in the energy market, and these aspects? Thank you.
My vision is still the same. We assume 2032 is a phase-out of coal, and still we are on the same date. We didn't change the date. So 2032, it's the final date of phase-out. Assuming, let's say that we close in December 1 unit. Do you think that the resilience of the national system will still stay? I said no. We are facing a crisis. We are facing the war. We have to supply also Moldova. Maybe we have to supply other countries. So we need electricity. So on short term, that means that we need the coal. I always said that we need the coal for short term. Yes, we cannot close the coal now. We found that solution. We found the solution together with DG Recovery, with PNRR, and we make the definition of technical reserve. And yes, technically reserve, it will be stay till the end of phase out. Because we never know what will happen. If we'll face another crisis, maybe not a war, but another crisis about after 5 years, what we will do? You don't have a reserve. That reserve now, this year, next year, and probably on short term, don't need any support from state because the energy is at a price that can support coal. Not coal is a marginal cost. It's not coal who is closing the market. It's the gas who is closing the market. But it will come the time when coal won't close the market. So for that time, if we will need electricity, we will pay for that reserve. Yes, we'll pay for the reserve. We need electricity. In the meantime, we will make all the investment in nuclear, in renewables, in gas, in order to finalize this transition. But we assume 2032, and we stay on 2032. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this strong message, Mr. Popescu. Ms. Vercher?
Thank you. I have to say I've never answered a question on coal before because we're not a coal producer, but we are a fossil fuel producer. So I think I would take the question in that way. So first of all, by the time Neptune Deep comes on, which I think will be a game changer for both the investors in this project, Romgaz and will be Petrom, but also for the country, because as the Minister said, we will go from being a net importer to a net exporter. So not only are we about the energy security for Romania, but how we contribute to some very important neighbors. I think this is fundamental. But also gas has a lower carbon footprint than coal. So, and it will make up 70% of our production by the time Neptune comes on. So we will be reducing our overall energy intensity of the products we put into market by shifting more towards gas. I also want to add just an example of transition. Because actually earlier this year, we announced in partnership with CE Oltenia, which is a coal power company here in Romania, a partnership to develop 450 megawatts of solar capacity. And I think this is an example of two fossil fuel companies coming together to transition, to provide a green electricity into the market. So I think it just shows that investment is going as part of that transition overall. So for us, one, we're reducing the carbon impact of our product into the market as we go more gas. And two, we are also partnering as fossil fuel companies to bring more zero carbon capacity onto the market.
So we've got a commitment that the future should be or will be renewable for sure.
I think so too. I think there's two important points I wanted to add just listening to others. So first of all, gas is a really important role for Romania. Yeah? And it's a really important role in the energy transition overall because of reliability, right? Because of affordability, because of energy security, but also because it has a lower carbon footprint. And Romania, once Neptune Deep comes on, will be the largest producer of natural gas in the European Union. So a big shift for Romania in this, a really big importance to it. And then I just want to touch on efficiency, if I might, because in the energy transition, efficiency is fundamental. Because a product that you want to say, actually, we need to be careful with this product. One, the product has become quite expensive, unusually expensive. And also we know that it has consequences to the environment, so we need to be careful with it. And so I just wanted to say that I think there's a huge opportunity in Romania with regards to buildings and the energy efficiency of buildings. And we've been working with an NGO on a project called România Eficientă, which is about trying to reduce the energy efficiency of buildings, or improve the energy efficiency of buildings, reducing their carbon intensity by 60% by investing. And we're working with schools, and we're starting with schools. And why do we work with schools? Because when you actually educate people about this, it changes their perceptions. And if you educate children, they take it home. And they have influence, and you educate the next generation on it. Because I do believe what Claudia is saying is that energy efficiency has a very, very important role to play for all of us from a societal perspective on the climate change agenda here.
If I may add to that answer, don't forget that the biggest producer of coal, Complexul Energetic Oltenia, is in a restructuring plan. The government already invested €1 billion to save it, and 1 billion to restructure it through modernization fund. As Cristina Verchez said, we will build 747 megawatts of photovoltaic electricity. That means greens. We also will build 1,325 megawatts of gas. That means after that, the biggest producer of coal, it will be the biggest producer of gas and renewables, and a little bit coal. The rest, it will be in reserve tanks. So we did a lot of things in order to restructure and to prepare for the future, because yes, we know that the future is that. So this is the reality. And on the resilience plans, that's nothing says that more than the restructuring plan that is already approved by the European Commission.
Mr. Weber.
Thank you. I fully agree, Mr. Popescu, but I think it will not be sufficient to only look at the biggest players in Romania and what they do, yeah? Because how you say that, you know, a lot of small contributions sometimes add up to much more than CEO and Petrom and Romgaz can do together. And I think this must be the direction to really help the prosumers, to really help to bring as many projects as possible, small ones, not so complex ones, which do not need so much investment as fast as possible on stream. Because let's not forget, the demand for electricity is growing in Romania because of the electrification. And that means we, even though thinking about replacing very polluting units, yeah, with green ones is already a challenge. But we need even more. Yeah, we need even more. And I think Romania has a big issue. Yeah, it is energy is the risk is it stays so expensive. Yeah, and it is not helping the competitiveness of the country. I think that is in the mid and long term a real issue. Yeah, therefore I think we need all together, yeah, to think how as many projects as possible can be, let's say, implemented, especially in the renewables area.
So we already finished a call of project in Peterere. It's about 1 gigawatt, 960 gigawatts. So it's already in evaluation, those projects. They are more than 1 gigawatt. So that's renewables project. We already did that. Don't forget the last year we changed the energy law. We introduced the concept of prosumer, and from that time, after we modified the law, from 300 prosumer, now are more than 30,000 prosumers in Romania. We have a problem with the distributors that are delaying entering in the network of the prosumers. Today we approve an emergency ordinance regarding the implementation of the RED II directive, and we have there that prosumers now can put not only on their roofs, but they can put anywhere they have location on the area of distribution with the same supplier. So we give them more flexibility in order to have more location to produce for their own consumption of electricity. So we do that, and we are very conscious that we have to help prosumers. Their more small capacity means big capacity. So we are focused on that issue.
I would just like to add to this to help Minister Popescu as well, and to really say that we have seen this year, and now I'm talking about end user customers, we have seen this year, and it's the first year actually where there isn't a push from the supplier towards the customer to install PVs and so on, but it's a request. And it is the first time that this is happening in Romania. We have to admit it, because we have to say that with energy being quite cheap so far, there was no attraction or attractiveness for the customers. We have been trying to push these products into the market for the last 5 years. And no matter how much we did, we were never as successful as we were this year. So we have to face this reality as well. On the other hand, also what I see as, again, a supplier, we do have shortage of specialists in terms of designing these projects, in terms of installing PVs and so on. So these are the challenges that we really need to find an answer to before just jumping into the fact that no, we don't have the right regulation or the right law. So yes, there is progress into this direction, and we as actors in this market, we need to find the solutions to our challenges.
This is an excellent point, and because we all speak about projects, about investment, the money are there, and it is a great context and a great opportunity. The need is there because everybody is now looking for sources for cheaper and affordable and more sustainable energy. But how do we, or what is your response from the business environment as organizers of massive investment programs in your companies and also at the level of the ministry? You had a very good point, because you need contractors in the end, you need engineers, and you need also technology. And we see a wave where everybody now is trying to buy, but we have some problems in the supply chain, because buying equipment for renewable is something that comes from Asia in a very big portion. Buying engineering, it's something that comes from Western Europe and Asia. How do we actually encourage the chain of building projects, not only paying for projects? Mr. Pignonoli.
I guess that this is a really interesting issue, in the sense that we were talking about so far about a crisis for supply of a commodity. If we are jumping into the transition, probably the supply chain shortage could be an issue. You're perfectly right. Obviously, the answer are not easy. For sure, we have to invest in this. Not invest in money, as you were saying correctly, but we invest in ideas. For instance, as you're aware, the Renewable Wind Energy Association in Romania, we have promoted also an event in order to talk about the supply chain. But it's clear that also at European level is an issue. But I could say that, as an Enel, for instance, we are massively investing in a factory in Catania, in Italy, for not simply to assemble the panels, but to build the samples from scratch. And now we're planning to do the same in the United States. This is our answer, but obviously it's a partial answer from a player. But I'd say that this is something that is also an issue at EU level, and I know that there are a lot of discussion over there, because it's the essence of the green economy, in a way that when this program has been launched, renewables were already there, and there was already plan in order to invest more in that direction. But really, green economy is a transformation of the whole economy, meaning obviously also the supply chain. After the first wave of investment, for instance, PV, basically all the factories in Europe disappeared. This is true. And now we are discovering that now it's a weakness, because we have to recover in that direction. I'm pretty sure that it is not a matter of technology, because I guess that there are all the capability in Europe to do so. And that's why, for instance, from wind standpoint, from wind industry, we have some other issues, not the technology, because most of the suppliers there are a problem in the supply chain, because once again, also to build a wind turbine, you need some pieces that are coming still from Asia. So I would say that there is not a straightforward answer, but for sure we have to team up in order to look at how to tackle this issue, because otherwise only the money are not enough, or the projects are not enough, because we need we need also this kind of supply in order to get there. As far as people is another issue. Also in this direction, I guess that in the moment in which we are talking about transition, we should invest a bit more also in education, because also for the efficiency in the buildings that we are seeing, there are a lot of opportunities. Also here, we have to shift competencies from the old sector to the new one. I don't guess it's a matter of number of people, but in terms of skill, for sure.
Thank you very much. Mr. Popescu, will these projects encourage the reinvention of the power engineering school in Romania? And also, I saw yesterday or 2 days back an announcement from the Ministry of Energy where some new programs to encourage the production of
yes, I think
equipment.
I think after pandemic, so in pandemic we saw that we are fully dependent of some products that we are not producing in Europe. And now we saw that we are dependent of products that are not so much produced in Europe as we needed. So in our resilience plan, we will finance, we have financing of 150 million euro, and we start the call of project in December, in a few weeks, about producing and assembling battery and producing of solar cell and panel solar. So we want to build here in Romania factories that are producing these items that are already needed in our economy. And we were already contacted by a lot of investors that are willing to come here and to make a line of production here. Even if you talk about battery, if you talk about solar panel, and they are asking about this call of project, and I told them, and now I have the opportunity to speak directly and to all, that we will launch this call of project in December. Regarding the human resources, yes, is needed. We saw this time at the beginning of last year when I had a discussion with the CEO of Nuclear Electrica, and he told me that the personnel there, the engineers there, are from the beginning of construction, and they are very good engineers, but we have to think on the future. I already spoke with the rector of Polytechnical University of Bucharest, and we want to have discussion with the Ministry of Education and to have on universities more students that are linked to energy, electricity, renewables, nuclear, because it's needed in our energy. There are a lot of needs of high qualified people, and of course we have to talk with Ministry of Education of high schools that will prepare pupils for electricity, because there are not only need of engineers, there are also need of medium educated people that can work in the electricity field, in the energy field.
Thank you. Mr. Weber?
Yes, I think these are very good ideas and very good projects. And if we will manage to attract them, this will be really great. And I think this shows actually an important point why this green transformation is not only about decarbonizing the energy. Yes, this is an important topic, but actually it is a great opportunity to create new industries, yeah? To actually bring new jobs to Romania, because I mean, if I think back, now Ms. Vecere is here at the table, but when I think back how the Ploiești area looked in 2004, 2005, yeah, when I was there around, and how it looks today, and a lot of the economic development happened because of huge investment in the refinery, into the CCGT, and I think this is actually a very positive effect you could have in an economy. By bringing, let's say, such production capacities, such new, let's say, innovative technologies to Romania. So the demand will create its workforce. Yeah? There will be, look into the automotive cluster in Western Romania. So if you once have the investments, they will find their way through if you let them do their job, right? So I think because energy itself is a commodity, and energy prices are actually I mean, it's not the objective to have the lowest prices. I think it is important to have a good competitive level in Romania so that businesses can develop and are competitive in international area, and you create also jobs. I think this aspect often gets forgotten in this whole discussion.
So it is much more than actually producing megawatts. It's actually shifting the economy and encouraging a new wave. We will close this debate by thanking our great panelists of today. Thank you very much for your excellent ideas and remarks. We indeed have a lot of opportunities in front of us, but we also have some difficult times to pass through. However, I think all the pieces of the puzzle are there, and together we can meet in spring. And when I say spring, I'm not actually referring to the season. Thank you very much, and see you next time with our energy discussions at Aspen Institute, Cupola. Thank you.
Please take your seats. Thank you. Thank you. Get back to the room. Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Jean-Christophe Bas. I'm the CEO and founder of Connectors for Peace. That is NGO working to combat polarization and working with UNESCO. I'm also a member of the executive board of the Aspen Institute in France that is partnering with our colleagues and friends from Aspen, Romania. It's a great pleasure for me to be moderating this last session today. I know that most of us are a little bit exhausted by this very long day or extremely interesting and stimulating discussion. And I'm sure that this last panel will be very much in line with the quality and the relevance of the discussion. We have discussed a lot today from the very start with the Secretary General of NATO about Ukraine, peace and victory, and what will happen next. And in a way, this has been the conductor, the red thread of the discussion today. And in a way, this session will be a good opportunity eventually to wrap up all those discussions and also to try to come up with some specific perspective. One thing actually is to discuss how to achieve peace, but also to look at what is coming next. How can we make peace sustainable? I think the Secretary General Stoltenberg really stressed several times in his intervention that the war has not started last February 24th, but actually it has started now 9 years ago. It will be certainly very difficult and challenging to maintain peace, sustain peace. It's also, and I think it was stressed by Deputy Secretary General Michel Genoa to say that, there are lots of, in a way, not obstacles, but it's very difficult to discuss about peace and the future in Ukraine when we don't even know when and how peace will be looking like. So there are plenty of those topics that we will be discussing today. Of course, you know what is the peace fit with the border of 2014 or before 2014, or the border of February 24th this year, or a mix of both. These are some of the questions that are looming ahead, and also the multiple dimension. It's a little bit, and I would not use certainly the expression of the Russian dolls, because that would be very inappropriate, but there are multiple layers. Of course, the peace between Ukraine and Russia, because we will not change the geography, so Russia will still be there. So this is, of course, one key element and component, but also what does it mean also for countries like Moldavia, Georgia. We had a special session about the Black Sea, and also in terms of to what extent this conflict will be a major game changer in terms of European political, democratic security architecture, and also at the global level. So we have 40 minutes to address some of those key topics, and the sequencing of this session will be the following. I will ask each of the panelists to come up with their own perspective on these topics, and then we will, maybe pick up a few topics that were pointed out, and also take a few questions from the audience, because the audience probably needs to be more solicited, and I'm sure you have a lot to say. So I'm not sure we have connected with us Natalie Yaresko, who is the chair of the Aspen Institute. She's connected, right? Okay. So we have the great pleasure to have with us Natalie Yaresko, who is the chair of the Aspen Institute in Kyiv, and was a former Minister of Economy, and who is actually today not in Kyiv, but in Washington, D.C. So, Natalie, you are most welcome, and you have the floor.
Thank you so much. Former Minister of Finance, just for accuracy. I thank you all for spending the time today to discuss this very issue. But there is really only one solution to achieve peace, and that is to defeat the Russian military. I think it was the Swedish foreign minister in Kiev this morning who said only military defeat of Russia can solve this conflict. Chairman Milley of the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the United States has said a similar thing. And I think that when we look for peace and to define what that long-lasting peace means, I think we look to President Zelensky's 10 principles that he presented at the G20 meeting. First, there needs to be nuclear safety. That means removing all troops from the nuclear power plant in Zaporizhia, as well as stopping all of the threats to use nuclear weapons. Second, there has to be food security for the world. These are steps that if you take them, you can build to peace, and they are easy to be taken. Food security means allowing for exports of grain through all of the ports in Ukraine. Third would be energy security. We need to stop these massive strikes. As you know, on November 23rd, there were some 67 cruise missiles fired at the electricity system, water, and power transmission systems in Ukraine. Over 40% of the system is damaged. At times, the entire country was under a blackout. They have to stop bombing the civilian infrastructure of the country as the third point. Fourth, return Ukraine's prisoners and return the forced deportees. Some 11,000 children are known by name to be forcibly deported to Russia. And we need to return all of these people for there to be peace. Fifth, and this gets to the question that you discussed in the introduction, there needs to be abidance with international rule of law, which means the UN Charter and the internationally recognized borders of Ukraine need to be reestablished. Our territorial integrity is critical. Sixth, of course, all Russian troops and all of Russian militias and Wagner groups and mercenaries need to be removed from the territory of Ukraine. Seventh, we need to have justice. We need to establish that special tribunal that was approved by a UN General Assembly vote. Eighth, and I think this is something we don't talk enough about, protection of the environment. There are tens of thousands of hectares that have been mined. This is the future of safety for the people of Ukraine, agriculture and farming, and so much more. The environmental devastation needs to end, and we'll need more resources in order to remove those mines. Ninth, we need to prevent any future escalation, and that has to do with the Security Compact. The Kiev Security Compact proposal, which Ukraine has developed together with former Secretary General Rasmussen, very clearly outlines what those steps need to be to assure that there is no future escalation, future rebuilding of that Russian military after its defeat. And then finally, at the end, you can confirm the end of the war. You can sit down and you can sign documents, but no documents can be signed, no agreements can be reached until there's good faith effort to meet these principles, because there is no trust and can be no trust with Russia, which is illegally in an unprovoked way invaded the country and used some, I don't remember it, I think the defense minister said today, 16,000 missiles against primarily 97% civilian infrastructure. So for there to be peace, you need to build trust. And those steps, implementing them one by one, can build the trust that can lead to a peace where Ukraine's borders are secure, where the world no longer need be concerned about future escalation. I'll end there. Thank you.
Thank you, Nathalie, for coming up with this list of 10 points to achieve peace, but also sustainable peace. I think it offers probably an excellent guidelines for this session and this panel. So maybe our panelists and speakers can also react to this list and maybe pick some specific perspective. I will give the floor first to Misha Gleni, who is the rector of the Institute for Human Sciences in Vienna, but was also a journalist and a broadcaster, and who wrote a few years ago this bestseller, mafia. So maybe you will also address this specific perspective. Misha, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. It's slightly invidious, I think, for all of us trying to imagine a peace at the moment when we are frankly still very far away from a peace, and there are so many movable parts in this war that it's very difficult to predict how the next 6 months is going to go, let alone anything beyond that. Even as we speak, the Ukrainians are engaged in an intense offensive against Kremina, whilst just a little further down the road, the Russians are engaged in an intense offensive against Bakhmut. And if either of those towns were to fall in the next couple of weeks or so, it would have a very significant effect on the tactical and strategic position. We have an, I think, almost unprecedented situation, certainly much more intense than the other war that I covered, the wars in the former Yugoslavia, of the use of artillery, the amount of artillery, the number of shells that are being fired every day. And now actually, this is creating a problem both for Ukraine supporters, the allies in the West, in terms of actually supplying the munitions that they require, particularly since you have often a disjuncture in the type of weapons that the Ukrainians are using, former Soviet weapons, and so the West doesn't produce the right size ammunitions for them. And Russia too is hurling so many missiles, as Natalie pointed out, largely at civilian infrastructures, but on the battlefields against the military as well, that Russia too is having supply problems, and yet there's no sign at the moment of the intensity of the war dying out. Then you have the international aspects where Putin is clearly banking on divisions within Europe as his primary strategy, above all else in Germany, but also he will have noted the divisions in the Czech Republic, in Italy, as to whether the European populations, we know that the Ukrainian population is going to sustain their morale for a long time, notwithstanding the terrible strategy that Putin has unleashed on them with the attacks on the civilian infrastructure and the power grid above all else. But how long are the European populations going to back support for Ukraine? We simply don't know, but we do know that there is a significant part, for example, of the German population which questions this whole strategy. Similarly, China clearly does not want Russia to pull it into a major confrontation with the Western powers, which is not of China's choosing, either the time or the place or the nature of it. And here, incidentally, I'd like to point out one good thing that has happened, and that is it has become clear that over the past few months, if not weeks, China and the United States have been engaged in back-channel discussions to ensure that this war does not escalate to nuclear, and that is a really good thing in my opinion. China has also expressed its dissatisfaction with Putin. Putin has lost the support of large parts of Central Asian countries who have expressed their dissatisfaction. But Putin continues to enjoy support in critical areas in Africa and in South America and in parts of Asia as well. So this is playing out on the battlefield. It's playing out on the level of the suffering of the Ukrainian people. Putin feels as though he can still continue to throw tens of thousands if not hundreds of thousands of young Russians into the meat grinder in eastern Ukraine. The Ukrainian morale, as I say, notwithstanding everything, remains incredibly high. So you've got a whole flock of black swans flying around this conflict at the moment. What happens when they either disperse or they land? Well, I'd just make a couple of remarks, is that whatever happens at the end of this, Russia will remain a power that possesses more nuclear warheads than any other country on this planet. And so how one deals with Russia, it's obvious what is going to have to happen in Ukraine, and Natalie has spelt it out very clearly in terms of issues like justice and so on, the reconstruction of Ukraine, which we know is going to cost a fortune. That will have to happen, and we will all have to put our shoulder to the wheel on that one. But Russia, which now is in danger of sliding into warlordism, is likely to be a very unstable place. And so it is my hope that in the chancelleries of Europe and in the United States, and even in places like China, as the Portuguese foreign minister was suggesting today, people are thinking of how do you manage Russia at the end of this war, whatever the outcome of this war is. And what you really have to watch out for, in my opinion, is you don't want anything like a repeat of Versailles.
Thank you, Michel. I think you have raised lots of very important points, and one of them actually is to say that it's very difficult to, just to have those discussions about the future of peace when we don't even have any idea of where we will be and what will happen in 3 months and 6 months. So, discussing about the new architecture is certainly worth our time and interest, but there is still lots of unpredictable perspective. You have also raised the important point of a risk of divide among Europeans that we see coming here and there, and that's actually maybe even growing in when winter is progressing. So this is obviously something that we have to look very carefully. And of course, this major issue about how to manage, how to handle Russia if indeed there is a total failure and the risk of total collapse, and so this is a major point. As long as we speak, there are more and more issues that are popping up and piling up, and I'm sure that Sarah Myriam Martin-Brûlé, who is a professor at the Bishop's University in Canada and also a fellow at the International Peace Institute, will be able to grab some of those issues. I would like also to say that Sarah is also an expert in conflict management and follow-up, and so I think she will also come up with this perspective.
Thank you very much. I would like to address this question of trust and what are the tools we have as an international community in order to build that trust and to come to a certain peace, however we define that peace. And that's, I think, also a question. How do we define peace and stability for that matter? And one tool that we have are, of course, UN peace operations. And UN peace operations were meant and were created to help state quell conflict, resolve dissensions, and of course protect civilians. And the questions of peacekeeping resurface, of course, with the war in Ukraine. In March, Poland suggested that it might be a good idea to have NATO deploy a mission in Ukraine in order to provide security. That proposition was then followed by the USCE, who suggested to also oversee a mission in Ukraine in order to help the population. And of course, then the question was raised, well, what about the United Nations? What about a peacekeeping missions? And when we talk about the UN, of course, one of the biggest advantage, or what is different about the UN, is that it regroups all the countries in the world. So by definition, by its very nature, the organization is international and hence can be seen as more impartial. The question then is, what type of peacekeeping missions would we see? Who would be involved? Which member states? How would it come forward, and which means would be deployed in order to carry on a peacekeeping mission? And as a Canadian, I put forward a proposition of a peacekeeping operations à la Suez. And what I mean by that is, of course, we've seen mostly in the 1990s and in the year 2000, mostly big peacekeeping operations, multi-dimensional missions that really aimed at quelling conflict within states. It's been, since the 1950s, we've rarely seen, or we've never seen, conflict between member states that included one permanent member against another. So the question of à la Suez refers, of course, to the UN missions, the United Nations Emergency Force that happened in Egypt in 1956, and that followed the idea of the former Canadian minister, Lester B. Pearson, who put forward this idea of deploying troops under the banner of the United Nations in order to supervise the withdrawal of France, UK, and Israel forces from Egyptian territories, and once the withdrawal would be done, to act as a buffer and, of course, to supervise the cessation of hostilities. There are two advantages, I think, to a mission of interposition like this. First of all, in the very idea of crafting, designing a mission that opens a new forum, a new area of negotiations between the permanent members, which, as you know, are the UK, China, Russia, France, and the United Nations. So it opens a new forum of discussion in agreeing on something, on doing something. And of course, the second advantage is that if a peacekeeping mission is indeed put forward, then of course it can help contain the conflict at the international level, certainly at the regional level, and alleviate the suffering of the population. But when I say à la Suez, I also refer to the role that Canada could have. And Canada, as a non-European mission, the founder of Blue Helmets, if I may say, with a significant Ukrainian diaspora that speaks the language, that know the territory, could have a key role. And this is the more current that the president of Ukraine actually called Canada for their help for a long-term peace plan on November 17 at the Halifax Security Conference. And I think that Canada could play a significant role in such a peacekeeping mission that, akin to the UNEF, so the United Nations Emergency Force that happened in 1956. Now, this one would be in Ukraine and could indeed supervise the withdrawal of forces and create and supervise the cessation of hostilities, act as a buffer as well. But of course, this would need to be revisited because, as we all know, the situation from 1950s has changed a lot. The technology has changed a lot as well. So there are many remaining questions. So, for example, what would be a buffer zone? What would we be supervising? Are we talking about a truce, a ceasefire, a full peacekeeping agreement or a peace agreement? And what does it entail in terms of monitoring, but also of different consequences? It's been mentioned that territories have been mined. We all know about the drones. Could we mobilize new technologies now to act as a buffer zone, maybe using cyberspace, satellites? So all of these questions stay there. But I think just the very drafting of any type of agreement or any missions would have this added value of starting a new space of negotiation between the member states, and that's something to be revisited. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah, Myriam, for first raising the point of the urgent and immediate need to rebuild trust, because there is no way to achieve sustainable peace if there is no minimum of trust. So this is the first requirement, and then using the experience, and particularly the Canadian knowledge and experience in terms of peacekeeping. We all know, for those who have been observing conflict and war in other parts of the world, that the peacekeeping and maintaining and sustainability of peace is sometimes more challenging than reaching the peace itself. Reaching the peace itself can happen sometimes, because for a whole range of reasons, but we see in many, many cases that the peace is not sustainable, and that for a whole range of reasons, conflict can start again. So, of course, and that would be a way also to bring the UN back in the game in this conflict, because there were many voices, saying that the UN have been somewhat absent. But I think it was said very clearly this morning that any organization that is having Russia as a permanent or as a member, is today totally unable to do anything. So, I mean, it's not a way to blame the UN for not being able to do anything. It's almost inherent to the situation. But hopefully, if and when peace will be achieved, hopefully the UN will be able to work again in a more effective way. So we will end this first round of initial remarks with Alena Kucko, who is the Vice President of GlobSec, which is a major think tank in Bratislava, in Slovakia, and who is also the Director of the Global Policy Institute of GlobSec. So, Alena, thanks for sharing your own perspective. Then we will get back to Nathalie to give her a chance to react to what our panelists on stage have said, and then we will take hopefully a few questions from the room.
I will actually start by bringing in the Sarah's points about the peacekeeping, and they connect them with the reflections that were already made throughout this conference in the earlier sessions as well. And the reflection is that Western-led ideas and institutions how to deal with peace or conflict elsewhere have largely failed. We have failed in our belief that trade and closer economic relations will ensure peace between countries, and that's why also there's no belief on either side of the participants in this conflict that peacekeeping is a solution. Sarah already pointed out that the offers were rejected, but also there is increasing understanding that a premature peace, and currently any peace that can be reached will be premature because both sides are unhappy and think that they can do more on the battlefield. This premature peace would be even worse than the current unpeace and the state of war that we have on the battlefield. In this regard, I absolutely agree with Natalie that peace will have to be won on the battlefield, and for that Ukraine needs to advance much more in deoccupying its territory. But I already said that actually, whatever happens, very likely that both sides will still be unhappy, which means that we'll probably be in this, if we're lucky, stable situation of unpeace, of pre-war, and if we're unlucky, in the kind of war-type situation for quite some time to come. Ukraine will be inherently unhappy if it doesn't deoccupy all the territories that it has, and Russia will be very unhappy with the undeniable defeat. And it's very unlikely that Russia is just going to be sulking quietly in its corner. Russia will, under the current regime, will think about satisfying its ambition, if not in Ukraine, then potentially in countries like Georgia, Moldova, or Belarus. That's why it will definitely be a long story, and indeed I agree absolutely that maintaining peace will be much more difficult and much more long-term mission than even getting to peace. In terms of maintaining peace and how to keep at least some countries, participants of this conflict, happy, Natalie outlined a fantastic list of preconditions that need to be met. Largely, of course, being representative of an organization that's located in Eastern Europe, we strongly believe that the only way to ensure peace in the entire region and not only in Ukraine is to provide Ukraine with the strongest security guarantees. And the only strong security guarantee that we can legitimately rely on is, of course, NATO membership. It is not going to come anytime soon, not in the immediate years, but it is fair enough and actually in our own benefit to make sure that we strive for this ambition. Before that comes and before it can become possible, Europeans will try to do everything possible to include Ukrainians into as many economic and societal structures as possible to make sure that if the time comes, Ukraine will also be ready to join the security arrangements in Europe. And I'll probably stop here for now.
Thank you, Elena, for this also very meaningful and important point that you raised, and indeed, what are the immediate priorities in terms of membership to NATO, membership to the EU, when would it come in the agenda? And I think it's very important that both institutions, being NATO, being EU, are ready to be reactive, and also that we are able to to assess when is the right time for Ukraine's membership. I will, as we said before, get back to Natalie, if she's still with us.
Yes. Yes, please.
Okay, Natalie, would you like to eventually react, comment on what, we had, I think, very rich perspective from our panelists, and we would like to have you maybe commenting or adding and coming up with your own views.
Thank you so much, and thank you, all of you, for your input to this issue. I want to step back for a moment and just say that peace requires military defeat, or there is no peace. A ceasefire is not peace with Russia. We've had a ceasefire for 8 years. I was minister when this war began. It led to further invasion. And peace does not alleviate suffering if a portion of the Ukrainian population remains under Russian occupation. Remember that every town that's been liberated, we unfortunately see after the high and after the wonderful news of a town being liberated, all of the tremendous evil and destruction, torture that goes on behind that wall of occupation. This is an attempt to destroy a complete society. It is an attempt to commit genocide and eliminate Ukrainians. So, to one of the speaker's points, Europeans can't give up on supporting Ukraine. They can't watch a European nation be destroyed. We've seen this before in history. We've seen a people being destroyed, and we reacted too late. We need to do everything we can to support military defeat of Russia in order to gain peace. And to the extent that Ukrainians are making the vast majority, 99.9% of the contribution to defending the peace and freedom of Europe, whether that's at the front, whether that's freezing in their apartments with no water in minus 10 degrees, 20 degrees centigrade. Europeans, democracies globally need to continue to support Ukraine. So I would urge not to look at a peacekeeping mission until at least some of those steps that I described to you have already been employed, so that we have some path to building trust. Trust that everyone mentioned is critical to any peace. But I just want to underline again before we move on, that there really is no peace and there is no sustainable peace that was described unless the military is defeated. The Russian military must be defeated. And so what that means is right now, support for Ukraine means more weapons. It means more air support, air defense. It means financial support to maintain critical government services. And now, because of the last weeks of carpet bombing the electricity and power system, it means helping support restoration of power throughout the country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Natalie. Actually, you are in Washington, D.C. Can you tell us a little bit about your recent talks and how do you feel about American support, and which is absolutely vital? Do you have any reassuring or assuring views to share with us?
Yes, I think there was some concern prior to the midterm elections that a change in power between the Republicans and Democrats in the House and or the Senate would potentially put some stress on the support for Ukraine. But in fact, after these elections and the change in power happened in the House of Representatives, the Republicans are now leading the House. They have reconfirmed complete support for Ukraine and for ending this war with a military defeat. In fact, the leadership of the House, the prospective leadership of the House, came out and said that they actually support more offensive weapons and longer range missiles. The one issue that they have raised to complement their support, so which we cemented bipartisan support again post-election, is that they would like to make sure that there is transparency in the provision and the utilization of that military support. So I think that they will be pushing for in pairing with a new package of support, which the administration has already proposed, and hopefully will pass before the end of this calendar year, an incremental $40 billion of support, military as well as financial. Pairing that incremental support, I believe the Republicans will push for mechanisms to ensure that the support is being used properly and that it's getting to the places it needs to get to, and putting to rest any questions about misuse, corruption, or other with that support. So I think we came out of these midterm elections in the United States with a stronger, more clear, bipartisan support for Ukraine, and I don't think there's going to be any change in that in the near future. I think that we all understand that Europe is more hard hit, both by the effect of the sanctions on the economy as well as the incredible number, 7 or 8 million refugees who fled Ukraine to Europe. But at the same time, I think that everyone is holding together in the United States, and that is to some extent remarkable but appropriate.
Thank you, Matt and Natalie. We have just a few minutes left. Are there any questions from the room? Yeah, we have two. So please go to the mic. Yeah.
Is it working? Yeah.
Yeah.
Good afternoon. Thank you, panelists. I would like to bring back one of the ideas that Misha commented before and bring it to you all to comment briefly, please. And is, how do we manage a defeated Russia? How do we do with that in the few years to come? Thank you. I'm Bas Moreno from the Spanish International Affairs magazine, Norte Mundial. Thank you.
Thank you for bringing this question back, which is absolutely vital. Maybe we take the second question right now.
Sure. Mihna from the Black Sea Trust. I wanted to shift a little bit the discussion towards the Armenian and Azerbaijan conflict in the context in which you would expect Russia to lose some of the influence it has in South Caucasus. But in this context in which Russia ceases to be a peace breaker in the region, and we see Azerbaijan growing its influence also as an energy provider for Europe. What role would you say should the Western countries, Europe, NATO, have in maintaining security in that region?
Okay. Is there any of you who want to address this specific point of Azerbaijan, Armenia? Okay, go, Michel.
I can do it very, very briefly, but it shifts the discussion away a little. This is quite an unstable region now, particularly Armenia, Azerbaijan. It's not just Russia that is losing influence, it's other countries that are competing for influence, particularly Iran and Turkey. And so it's not out of the question that this becomes another area of instability. From the European Union's perspective, reducing the sort of black swan overflow of the Russia-Ukrainian war is incredibly important. There's not much that the European Union can do in Armenia and Azerbaijan, frankly. It can do more than it's doing in the Western Balkans, however, by accelerating the process of integration of the Western Balkans into the European Union, and thus blocking off one area of Russian influence in Europe.
we have just a few minutes left, and I think it's very important to address this point of how do we deal with Russia? How do we manage the risk of Russia collapsing and with a new chaos looming ahead? So maybe we could end the discussion on this topic, so each of you could come up with your own views or advice, and then we will ask Natalie also, because she's, and the Ukrainians are immediately concerned with this issue, and that would be our last word. So, go ahead.
I'll connect actually the two questions, because the issue of Azerbaijan and Armenia, yes, shows limitations of what Europe can do, I mean the European Union, and B, it shows very clearly that there are other powers in the world that will be increasingly active, not just in Armenian-Azerbaijani conflict, but actually will be increasingly active in trying to have a role in whatever solution there is to the war in Ukraine. For example, Turkey is the best case example, and Turkey already plays an important role. But switching to how to manage a defeated Russia. First, I think Russia is very far from collapsing, and I don't think Russia is going to collapse anytime soon, regardless of the outcome of the war in Ukraine. What's important to remember is that Russia strives to be a great country. It's not just about Putin himself. There are certain elements in the philosophy of the state building in Russia that implies that Russia is a great country, which means it's the opposite of a normal country. So unfortunately, probably we need to expect that Russia will try to restitute its ambitions elsewhere. And that's why I'm saying that we need to be extremely careful and try to predict and help countries like Georgia or Moldova in making sure that they're not next targets of the defeated Russia as well. What will be important also in managing the defeated Russia is trying to bring more other countries into the conversation, be it Turkey or be it China on the nuclear issue as well. And finally, my final point, and that goes back to Misha's previous points about the repetition of Versailles. Of course, justice is important, but justice is not the same thing as revenge. So when victory comes, Ukrainians and Europeans will need to be somewhat merciful in their victory to make sure that we do not have to deal indeed with the repetition of Germany between the two wars.
Sarah.
Very quickly, I think we can go back to the definition of what would it mean a defeated Russia and what it means in which territory as well. And it's been mentioned by Misha on all the dimensions in which Russia is trying to influence different terrain and areas of operations, and that will go on. And there's many ramifications, I think, to Russia's operations, activities, and influences. So a defeated Russia on one area doesn't mean a defeated Russia on all areas as well.
Misha?
Just in terms of the defeat of Russia, just as Lenin saw imperialism as the last stage of capitalism, Putinism is the sort of the final stage of the grandeur of Tsars and the embodiment of the state and the Godhead in one person. What this means is that if there is a defeat, I am certain that Putin will fall. It would probably be more advantageous for us if Putin falls earlier, because I don't think Russia will sustain the war if Putin falls. The problem about that is that we don't yet see the critical mass of what I call the Ceausescu moment or the Milosevic moment, whereby his own security forces decide to devour him. And so we have to brace ourselves. We have to prepare for a long war. This is going to be long at the moment, unless that black swan lands and Putin goes.
Thank you, Misha. Natalie, you have the last word. So there are some different perspectives about Russia and Putin, and short-term, mid-term, longer term. So give us your perspective, and this will be the conclusion of this panel.
One very kind of broad statement is that I was in the US administration when the Soviet Union was collapsing, and the George Bush senior administration at the time was also terribly concerned about the Soviet Union's collapse and what would happen to the nuclear weapons. And so this concern is not new, and yet we've gotten through it. So I urge everyone not to base our attempts to support Ukraine and achieving defeat on what will happen in Russia. I think that has to be something that is secondary to bringing a military defeat first. I think practically what happens with Russia will, to a large extent, depend on how we as democratic countries have come to support Ukraine, strengthen the region, meaning Moldova as well, strengthened our NATO forces, and what we've created in the interim during this horrific war in terms of strength, which will then, I think, define whether or not Russia continues to be an imperialistic and militaristic state or not. And so I think that the security guarantees, the bilateral and multilateral security guarantees that are built as we seek peace, I think how we invest in the rebuilding of Ukraine and strengthening Ukraine post or even now as we move through this war towards a eventual and necessary peace, I think are going to be very, very important criteria for defining what Russia will or will not do after its defeat. But I think we need to focus right now, because the number of people that are dying and the way these people are dying at the targeting of the civilian infrastructure and the targeting of civilians is something that we need to put an end to as democracies globally, not just for Ukraine, but for ourselves and for the future of democracy globally. Thank you.
Thank you, Nathalie, for those words that are, in a way, very strong message and optimistic views. And I think this is a very nice way to end this first day of discussion of the Bucharest Forum. So thanks to everyone for your resistance to this long day. Thanks to our panelists, and please give them a round of applause, for this discussion. Thank you, and don't know at what time do we start tomorrow. Maybe Mrs. MC, you can give us some instruction.
Definitely will. So thank you everyone for staying with us until the end. We will invite you for a cocktail reception outside. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow again, starting at 9. Thank you.